We spoke about proactive health in general terms. What are the three goals that you have as far as proactive P4 medicine is concerned?
Right. The three goals are quite simple. The first goal is to quantify wellness. What do I mean by that? You want to know on the disease wellness scale, if I do a history on you and I examine you and I do some tests, where are you? Are you on the wellness side? Are you sort of neutral, or are you headed down the disease pathway to an early death? So the first step is to quantify people, and it's done very easily now because inexpensive tests, non-invasive tests, and can be easily done pretty much anywhere, even at home. So that's the first step, which is personalized to you, and at the same time will predict. We now have a pretty good idea. If we do that risk assessment, I can more or less predict. I mean, I can't predict if you're going to get hit by a truck when you walk out of your, I mean, I'm not an astrologist or something, but I can pretty much predict which direction you're going. The second sort of goal is to demystify disease. You know, I think we've done people a real disservice. First of all, there was specialization. And look, don't get me wrong, if I get hit by that truck walking out of your front door or something, you want a good cardiothoracic surgeon, you want a good general surgeon to patch you and put you together again. However, where we've gone off the rails a bit is physicians have become so specialized, and it doesn't make sense because the body works as a system. A good example is most dermatologists, what they're seeing in their office, and it's one of my pet peeves, is, you know, there's lots of cortisone given, there's lots of antibiotics given, and that's kind of their main armamentarium. But the truth is most of the disease in the skin is coming from the gut. So unless you fix the gut, you're never going to fix some of those skin problems. So I think that we have to demystify disease and recognize that most disease comes from really just a half a dozen root causes. What I like to talk about is a whole person approach. So we don't just look at the arm or the face or something, we look at the entire person, which includes the psychological, because the mind-body connection is very, very strong. And that's really only been in the last 30 years.
How do you demystify disease, Greg?
The key is to recognize that we are whole human beings. And we also have to recognize that just because you put a label on something, it doesn't really that's symptomatic kind of treatment. Because so much in our medical world is inflammation, and in fact it's, for instance, dermatitis, esophagitis, duodenitis, rheumatoid arthritis. All they're doing, itis just means inflammation, and it's true that most chronic disease come from inflammation. So that is one of the root causes, is inflammation. And so if you look at a tree is a good example, because if you see all the leaves in the tree as being diseases, then you have a specialist that's focused on that particular thing. But truly the root causes, and that's why we use this integral acronym. The integral acronym, besides the inflammation, nutrition, toxins, exercise, sleep, gut, hormones, supplements, mind, body. So the integral is a whole person approach to healthcare, and what we do to demystify it is to connect the dots for a person so that they know their brain fog might be due to autoimmune disease, or that their psoriasis, you know, or other skin rash might be due to the gut microbiome primarily. So, you know, heart disease is a good example. It's not cholesterol. I can tell you categorically, you do not die from saturated fats and LDL cholesterol. 100% of people having heart attacks have insulin resistance. So we have to demystify disease in a very credible way with all the peer-reviewed proper, you know, articles, but we have to simplify it for people so they know and they can look. You can't heal a person just by looking at one of those 8 integral pieces. You have to look at the whole person.
What do you mean by orthodoxy in this context?
This is one of my favorites. So I'll give you an example. Orthodoxy is a long-held core belief that is not any more true. Like, for instance, Warner Brothers, as you know, they were the early originators of movies. But here's Warner himself saying, who wants to hear actors talk? Well, I'm not sure you've ever seen a movie without, you know, an actor talking. Or another one which I love is Watson, the chairman of IBM. You know, I think their world market might have room for 4 or 5, you know, computers. Well, there's no one who doesn't have a computer anymore. So these are orthodox statements that have actually no bearing in today's world. And the prime example in the whole healthcare business is Ansel Keys, who in 1977 basically came up with a diet heart hypothesis. And you have to realize it was a hypothesis. There was no genuine proof. So shortly after this, the US guidelines came out that encouraged people, because what Keys said was that heart disease came from cholesterol. Just before, because they found cholesterol in the coronary arteries, did not mean that it was a cause of the heart attack. So it's clearly been shown. Unfortunately, the US guidelines that came out a few years later adopted this hypothesis. So what they told Americans to do was to lower their fat from where it was at the time to no more than 30% of the diet, and to bump up the carbohydrates from where it was up to 55%. This was probably the single biggest mistake that we have made, and that it has affected people's health worldwide. We were talking earlier about diabetes. The diabetes epidemic is a direct result of this misinformation from the US dietary guidelines. In fact, as you might know, Tarek, as of last year, cholesterol was taken off the danger list of foods. And we now, without any doubt, when we go back and look at Ansel Keys' original 22 country studies, we find that sugar correlated far more with heart disease than cholesterol. This is just an example of simplistic, you know, cause and effect kind of misinformation, and it's really hurt us big time.
There's a food pyramid behind you, Graham. What is this about?
Yeah, this is one of the infamous food pyramid is one of the biggest mistakes we made. You know, as recently as a few years ago, the American Heart Association advised people to eat 6 or more servings of breads. This is all the ones on the bottom, by the way.
Yeah.
Bread, cereal, pasta, starchy vegetables that are low in fat and cholesterol. And get this, to drink, choose fruit punches or carbonated soft drinks. I mean, you know, a carbonated soft drink has 11 teaspoons of sugar in it. So, you know, this is what we were advised to do. And I tell you truthfully, I went out last year to the Elaine Diabetes Center, and it's a beautiful center, by the way. And I went down to their nutritional kitchens, and guess what? There was the food pyramid stuck on the wall in the nutritional kitchen. So I said to the lady, the nutritionist, I said, what do you advise your diabetics, because it's a diabetes center, what do you advise your diabetics to eat? So she proudly points, oh, we always tell them to have 4 or 5 servings of, you know, cereals and grains and things. And I mean, I'm like shocked. And then they were proud to show me that a less than 1.2% success rate with their diabetes. This is madness in my book. So we really got things messed up, and we have to sort of put the blame fairly on Ansel Keys and his misguided diet heart hypothesis. So unless this word gets out, and I don't mean just to consumers, but it has to go out to physicians who are dealing with these people every day. So
the world is fat, diabetic, and sick. What kind of a statement is that, Graham?
Well, I tell you, it's true. And why do I say that? It was published in JAMA, the Journal of American Medical Association, in September of 2015, that 53% of Americans had either diabetes or pre-diabetes. About a month ago, there was an article that showed 80% of Americans have abnormal blood sugars. This is kind of pre-diabetes. So in my experience over the last 8 years being here in the Middle East and India, I would say that in India, it's not 53%, it's probably closer to 74, 75% of the population. And here in the Middle East as well, the 5 of the fattest country in the world are right here in the Middle East. So, this obesity, diabetes, the diabesity connection is very strong, and it's because of the tremendous changes that have occurred, in the diet in people in the last 100 years. And obviously this is a picture of all the common diseases that we're all familiar with, which is all coming from insulin resistance, basically from sugar, grains, and adulterated oils, plant oils.
You mentioned diabetes. You mentioned the diabetes epidemic, and you mentioned the carbonated drinks and orange juice. Why is that affecting us so much?
If you have to always look at our ancestral health. Humans have been evolving, I believe, probably over 2.5 million years. So you have to understand that things like grains were only about 10,000 years old from the Nile Valley. So there were never grains before that. Now, obviously sugar was very hard to get, because early man, where would he get it? Maybe a few berries, maybe a little beehive up in the tree, which you have to fight to get the honey out of the hive. So there was very little sugar. Now think about it. Every street corner, you go in, what do you see? You see all carbonated beverages, you see all juices, and there's really not a big difference between even freshly squeezed juice and a Coke. A Coke is 11 teaspoons of sugar, and a glass of orange juice 7 teaspoons. So it's different if you eat the whole orange, and you're only probably going to eat one, you peel it, it's got the fiber in it, so you have a much more gentle sugar. But you go and squeeze 3 or 4 oranges, and then you gulp it down, you have a huge insulin response, which is hurting your blood vessels throughout your body. So sugar is absolutely top of the list. A very good guy to read is Robert Lustig. He's a pediatric endocrinologist from San Francisco. So sugar is a major issue. And the sugar, you'll be shocked at how the sugar has gone up in the last couple of hundred years. It's unbelievable.
You also mentioned that there's a difference between men and women and how they absorb this sugar.
Well, the size, women generally should be smaller than men. Sometimes they're not. But the point is that their livers have a less of a capacity to. Lustig is quite adamant about that if you look at the total amount of sugar a person, there's in a teaspoon there are about 4 grams of sugar. So a person should not be taking more than about a very small amount of sugar. But for instance, if you're taking 6 teaspoons of sugar, which is the maximum for a woman, that's 24 grams of sugar. So, and it doesn't matter if it's artificial sugar or natural sugars, but that total should be that. And for a man, about 36 grams of sugar, which is about 9 teaspoons of sugar.
We've got the world's fattest man, Juan Pedro Franco.
Yeah, and
Tell us more about Juan Pedro, and what do we do not to look like Juan Pedro? I'm almost there. No, I'm not quite.
We actually had the fattest woman in Abu Dhabi last year, and she died. But anyway, look, part of this gentleman's problem is grains and sugar.
You see him?
Basically sugar, grains, and vegetable oils. But to give you a good example, here the UK has the best data on sugar consumption. And you can see in 1700, the average English man or woman probably only ate about the whole year 4 pounds of sugar. And then 100 years later, in 1870, it was really up to about 25 pounds, and then 100 pounds, and today in 2000, and in some parts of the world it's even more, there's more than 155 pounds of sugar per person that's being consumed. So sugar by far is the most toxic substance. If sugar was discovered today, it would probably be outlawed. It's an incredibly toxic substance, and people don't know that. And again, it relates to the frog story. If you're taking a little sugar every day, you don't really notice this. But John Yatkin, one of the most famous British researchers in the 1970s, showed that heart disease was absolutely caused by sugar. And he was vilified by our good friend Ansel Keys, who came up with the diet heart hypothesis. So for many years there was the cholesterol debate, which sort of overshadowed the sugar debate. But I think we've come full circle now, and we realize that sugar is really the prime cause of heart disease and many of our chronic diseases we see today.
How do you reverse and cure the top cardiometabolic diseases, which you've mentioned primarily caused due to insulin resistance?
So I think the first point is that, you know, a lot of people, when you say the word cardiometabolic, it doesn't mean too much to them, Tarek. So I think I have a slide. Here's a slide here that actually shows you 20 of the common cardiometabolic disease. Obviously, obesity, diabetes, heart disease, cancer, autoimmune, metabolic syndrome, Alzheimer's, erectile dysfunction, aging itself, as well as blood pressure issues. And there's another 10 slides, inflammation throughout the body, which is a major cause of cancer, liver disease, you all know about non-alcoholic fatty liver disease, carb syndrome, arthritis, irritable bowel, skin neurodegenerative disease, PCOS, kidney disease, heartburn. These are all related to insulin resistance.
Okay.
And it's a very simple solution. And so to answer your question exactly is, you know, how do we fix and cure this? We have found that a keto diet and intermittent fasting are the best single ways to reverse this disease very quickly. I am shocked to see diabetic sugars drop from 300-400 to normal in weeks once people get onto a ketogenic diet. Now, just to explain what a ketogenic diet is, look, a baby when it breastfeeds is basically on a ketogenic diet from the mother. Why? Because colostrum, the breast milk, is 70% fat. And that's really what a keto diet is. It's 70% fat. Now, obviously, because of Ansel Keys, again, and his whole hypothesis about heart and saturated fats and that, which have nothing to do with anything, we made people very sick across the globe, not just in America, because a lot of people adopted some of these practices from America. So, in a way, we spread a lot of Western disease to every part of the globe. Humans, when we evolved over hundreds of thousands of years, we were basically, initially, as you know, more hunter-gatherers before we became agriculturists just 10,000 years ago. So if you look what happens in the wilderness, people, there's obviously, think about it, just say 500 years ago, you know, there's no Pizza Hut, there's no Coca-Cola, there's no juices, very little fruit. These people were hunter-gatherers. Their food, they were basically eating a keto diet. It was mostly high fat, moderate protein, and low carbs, because there were no grains, no sugar. So the carbs were very low. So that's why indigenous people, like say the Maasai in Africa, or the Inuits, Eskimos, or the plain Indians, they were completely free of those 20 diseases I've just shown you. Why? Because they were not eating those modern Western foods that are literally killing people worldwide. So we have found, particularly over the last couple of years, that it's very easy to put people on a keto diet. And there's now hard science to show, like the Virtus study that came out early part of last year, of over 300 type 2 diabetics, 70% of them were able to pretty much cure their diabetes, reverse their fatty livers, and 22 out of 26 major cardiac risk factors disappeared. So how do we fix this? It's the same old thing, and it's not hard. In the Virtus study, they had 93% compliance of people on the diet. That's unheard of. In my 40 years, I've never been able to put someone on a calorie in, calorie out, 1200 calorie diet. No one ever did it. They did it for a week or two. They were hungry most of the time. End of the story. However, on a high fat diet, because there's satiety, you basically are not hungry, and therefore you stay on this. So to see 93% of these diabetics stay on this high fat diet, which by the way did not combine intermittent fasting, which would have made this much more powerful. It was astonishing to see that, and there's now hard proof, and keto is growing worldwide. And why? Because it's so effective. So it is not hard to do, inexpensive to do. You do it in your own home with a little guidance. We have some health coaches that help people with that.
Dr. Simpson, how do we reverse and cure top cardiometabolic diseases which are primarily due to insulin resistance? And I know you've spoken about this.
Sure.
What are the key elements?
Sure. Look, I think the first thing is to recognize what are cardiometabolic diseases, and I can promise you 80% of the disease will probably fall into these 20 problems here. Heart disease is obviously the number one killer. Cancer is number two. We'll forget doctors for the moment. Diabetes, obesity, autoimmune disease. 1 in 4 people now have autoimmune disease. What are autoimmune disease? Multiple sclerosis, psoriasis, Crohn's disease. I mean, there's a lot of autoimmune disease. Hashimoto's, most thyroid disease. So people need to understand what cardiometabolic disease is. And obviously, high blood pressure, irritable bowel, neurodegenerative disease, Alzheimer's, Parkinson's. Many of these things are all related. Kidney disease, most people who are on dialysis, I would say 90% are diabetic. So, you know, there's a good guy, Jason Fung, who figured after 13 years of dialyzing people, he needed to move upstream and look for the cause. And he realized that most doctors don't know how to treat people who are fat and diabetic. We've had miserable success. Why? Because we use this outdated first law of thermodynamics, calories in equals calories out. People are fat because they're lazy and they eat too much. It's absolutely nonsense. So unfortunately, we have to re-educate all our nutritionists, because the nutritionists in America, in India, here in the Middle East, in South Africa, they're all singing the same song that came from Ansel Keys. You know, the first thing you have when you have your cholesterol goes up a little bit, the first thing the doctor says, oh my goodness, no more red meat, you know, no more eggs, and here's some statins, a little, you know, Crestor, Lipitor or something, and goodness gracious, this is nuts. There's 144 side effects with statins. No one should be taking statins. There is maybe a case for the person who's had one heart attack. Instead of 3 out of 100 heart attacks for the second heart attack, there's 2 out of 100. Okay, big deal. But if I had a heart attack, maybe I'd take it, but certainly not for primary prevention. Cholesterol is essential, and I want to say categorically it has little or nothing to do with heart disease. So how do we fix this? That's your real question. Okay, so now that we got fat out of the way, fat is not the enemy. Fat is your friend. If you want to lose weight, eat fat. So we have to rethink about fat. I'd mentioned also like a baby. If you look at a baby sucking on the breast, that baby is on a keto diet because the breast milk is 70% fat. For thousands, actually probably millions of years, or at least thousands of years, humans were basically eating a ketogenic diet. We were hunter-gatherers initially before we became agriculturalists. And so I'd mentioned many of the early indigenous people around the world, the Inuit, you know, Eskimos, you know, their diet is mostly fat. There's very little else that they eat. It's polar bears, fish, penguins, you know, all the fatty, seals. So, and guess what? There's little or no heart disease. And it's the same with other indigenous tribes. You know, what do the Maasai eat? The Maasai drink milk from their cattle and they eat meat. No heart disease, or very little heart disease. And the same with the plain Indians in North America. So all these indigenous tribes were pretty much free of these cardiometabolic diseases. So we have found tremendous success in curing people, often in as little as 4 weeks, with using a high-fat 70%, 20% protein, 10% carbohydrate diet. That is a keto diet, as opposed to, say, a paleo diet, which is really a third. So I was a great proponent of paleo. However, I don't think we went far enough, probably because many of the people who were the best paleo guys also felt that we'd all been indoctrinated by this high-fat nonsense, you know, particularly when we were younger in school. So I think this was the reason. But the proof is that people around the world are having tremendous success reversing all these chronic diseases, just with a ketogenic diet. And when you combine the intermittent fasting, and this is not difficult, and intermittent fasting is basically eating dinner early and breakfast late, no big deal. So you try and eat 2 meals a day. You can have a nice coffee or tea in the morning or something like that, but you try and finish by 8 o'clock, and then you go through to about 1 or 2 where you have your first meal and then a second meal. Now there are different variations with fasting, but in my experience with my clients, it's the easiest one. I can even do it, which is unheard of. But the point is it's very easy to do, and it has a tremendous positive effect in weight loss and reversing diabetes.
Excuse me. Graham, about 5 or 6 years ago, I went on a very strict paleo diet, and over a 4-month period, a 4.5-month period, I lost up to about 20 kilos, and I was at my perfect weight. And now I have put back 8-9 kilos of those back. Shall I go back to a paleo diet, or are we now looking at a ketogenic diet? And what does that mean to me in terms of my lifestyle?
Look, if it was really if you told me, Graham, I've got early diabetes and, you know, other risk factors, and that's why we do the risk stratification, depending on the urgency, I might suggest you go directly to a keto diet, because keto diets are so powerful, particularly when you combine it with the intermittent fasting. So I would say, you know, Derek, because people also like to see results, and I think that's why the keto diet is so successful. If you followed and kept your grams of carbs to less than 50 grams, because remember, when you're doing paleo, you're probably 100 plus. So when you get your carbs really low, this is when you switch, and when you do this intermittent fasting, your body switches from sugar burning to burning your fat, which is really what you want. So I would absolutely suggest you go on a keto diet for, say, 2 or 3 months. I tell you, in 2 or 3 months, your 9 kilos will be gone. Then yes, you can maybe increase a little bit of carbs, but I wouldn't eat 300 grams of carbs. You know, I'd eat 100 grams of carbs. And you also, people need to understand, you know, a banana is 20 grams of carbs. We talked about orange juice, that's 20 grams of carbs. You have a chapati, depending on which type you have, it's 25 grams of carbs. So, I mean, it goes up like this. So, you know, 50 grams is, you have to keep it really low. And that's what a keto diet is. It's basically 10% carbs of your macronutrients. And most of your food needs to come from the good fats. Avocados, meat, chicken, eggs. And I'm going to be talking to my dear friend from Delhi, hopefully, who is a great keto coach, and he's a veg. So can you be a healthy, you know, veg, you know, and do keto diet? Absolutely. So, and it's because your protein needs are not that extravagant. So most vegetarians, if they're a little smart, can absolutely get on a keto diet as well. So, and then you can maybe, as things are more in control, you can go back up to your paleo diet, which seemed to be pretty good for you, and you can add a few more carbs and things there. So really, this is pretty much what you need to know. Boom, done.
You spoke about intermittent fasting.
Yeah.
That sounds very interesting. What exactly is it?
You know, there are a number of different ways to do an intermittent fast. Like I said, I think the easiest thing that I've found for my clients is to just do 16-8. Or you could do 2 days. You know, in the Muslim world, a lot of people actually do 2 days per week where they reduce significant their food. And then you can do 5 days a month and also reduce it. Walter Longo from the University of Southern California is very big on what he calls an FMD. It's a fasting mimicking diet. And there's evidence to show if you do something like that for 20 years, you probably add on 18 years of life. It's quite astounding. So it's just having that intermittent sort of fasting mimicking diet for 5 days, and you don't have to do it every month. If you do it 4 or 5, you know, months of the year, that's okay. You know, a guy in the UK also did the 2-7, Mosley, I think was his name, who had a great success with a lot of the English population. But the 16-8, works really, really well. And like I say, it's just simply eating your dinner early and your breakfast late. So it's very easy. You're not hungry. It's easy to do. And
what does it do to your body?
it does a number of things. First of all, the most important thing, I'll give you a good example. Back in the 1960s, that's when snacks were introduced by our good big food companies. Because, your parents, Tariq, and mine, probably ate breakfast, lunch, and dinner 3 meals a day. So suddenly people were eating 6 meals a day. And that means your body never gets a chance to burn your fat, because you've constantly got sugar coming into your diet, because most of these snack processed foods are full of sugar and bad toxic vegetable oils and things. So you never actually ever get to burn your fat. So I think that fasting, and now you instead of just 3 meals a day, we know that if you do just 2 meals a day, you're burning much more fat and your insulin levels are a lot lower. Because remember, every time, this is why fat doesn't bump insulin. So that's very important. If you eat too much protein, you can bump your insulin. But the thing that bumps your insulin is carbohydrates. So, if you keep that down and you're on a keto type of high-fat diet, your insulin is very, very low, which is exactly what you want. So I also believe, and other doctors believe this as well, that, when your body, all the energy is not just digesting food, 24/7, that, there's a lot of good sort of, crude way, energy or whatever, to go to places where it's really needed, rather than just in the constant digestion of the stuff in the stomach.
Now let's get it to integrative medicine. What is it and how does it impact our lives?
Again, I might have mentioned, look, our approach in Eternity is we're very interested in a whole person approach that is looking at the root cause of disease. So that essentially integrative functional, there's lots of different names for it, but it's essentially addressing the root cause, looking at the whole person, and obviously involving the person in a participatory way. So that's really what integral, nothing special. And that's why we use the integral acronym, because it reminds us of those 8 most important root causes of disease.
What, you have the acronym there.
Right.
Where do we start? I mean, what's the easiest ones to start with and get into this?
Inflammation, and inflammation drives most of the disease in the body. So nutrition is probably the main cause of inflammation. But toxins, if you're smoking, you've got more inflammation in your body. A lot of chemicals that you use on your hair shampoo, your deodorant, there's plenty of other toxins coming in besides all the environmental toxins. So toxins are everywhere on our food. I don't know if you know this, but in the last 3 decades, the sperm count in men has gone down tremendously. So we're going to probably have to start banking some sperm, otherwise we're going to run out of people perhaps, but that's a good thing. But anyway, exercise and sleep, the gut microbiome is critical for autoimmune disease, restoration of hormones, adequate supplements. None of these things are difficult to do. And a lot of it is habit. Sleep is incredibly important. Many people, we're going to see a whole rise of digital disease. And, you have to look at the amount of screen time you're using on your phone. The average person answers their phone 160 times. We also know that all this constant blue light is affecting our mitochondria and our gut microbiome, and is responsible for probably a lot of disease. Some of my fattest clients that I've ever seen, 58% body fat, which means more than half the person, like a block of butter, in young girls who are on their phones 24/7. So the mitochondria, which are little energy packets inside all our cells, are tremendously disturbed by this blue light, including the mitochondria and things in our gut. So you want 7 hours, you should not use blue light before you go to bed for 2 hours. You should put your screen, the sunset, sunrise, thing on so it dims in that orange hue. So some of these things are very easy to do. You know, eliminate processed food. You know, just eat real food. Easy, in some sense. And you know, hormones you have to get measured. A few supplements. These are not complicated things to do. So, and very inexpensive. So.
And you've got a lot of technology there, and I think this is accelerating as we go forward and democratizing healthcare.
You know, we do all our programs, we measure, which is that quantifying of wellness, and then we mentor, which is the integral acronym, where we're addressing the root causes. And the third part is that we want to monitor. So we measure, mentor, monitor. So the monitoring is done with a simple app. So, and we've also got a dashboard because we've got a lot of health coaches who can actually monitor a group of clients and see how they're doing. So we like to use the app because I think when people see what's happening, I'll give you another very good example. About a year ago, I started doing continuous sugar monitoring. I don't know if you know about it, but it's just like a little disc that you put on people's arms. It measures your sugar every 15 minutes. And I tell you, it's astounding to see what happens, because normally what I do, I get someone to come in, I say, look, they're diabetic, don't change anything, stay on your diet, what you're eating, stay on your medicines that you got from your doctor, and let me just record you for 4 days. They come back, and oh my goodness, you see the sugars, 200, 300. And then on day 5, I say, look, do me a favor, here's some sheets, they call green sheets, like a traffic light, green, orange, and red. Red's bad. Green sheets, I say, look, just eat on the green sheets. And do that just for 4 days for me. Promise you're going to eat on the green sheets. Man, people come back in 3 or 4 days, their sugars are normal. We can take them off their insulin in a week or 2. In fact, most type 2 diabetics should not be on insulin. It's kind of malpractice in a way. So having these kinds of instruments where people can see, because we ask them to keep a little log of what they eat. And you know, often a person comes in and then suddenly there's one little spike and they say, oh my goodness, that's when I went to a party and I had a big shawarma and a Coke, and you can sort of see what's happening. But this is very valuable for the person. And then you've got a choice. You either continue with your medicines and your bad diet and you die early, or you say, you know what, I'm going to stay in this as a lifestyle and I'm going to get healthy and enjoy my life. So that's a real conundrum. Now, a lot of my left brain men, you know, they like numbers. You know, you show them that, man, they're convinced. Man, oh my God, I didn't realize this. So those are easy fixes. The other ones, and yes, we all have cravings. We all screw up a bit and things like that. But if you do that occasionally, it's not a big deal. It's this constant influx of these sugars and grains that are killing us worldwide.
You mentioned the exponential growth of digital technology, and that is extremely relevant in this particular time. Because I'm a victim of this, and I was a victim of this last night. I sort of woke up at 2 o'clock and my mind was alert. And one of the things I did was I had my cell phone and I watched a little bit of YouTube on that at 2:03 in the morning. And I ended up fading out around 2:30 or so. Was that completely the worst possible thing I could do?
It's not the worst possible. I could think of a few more worse things to do. But look, it's not a particularly good thing to do. And try and also turn off that blue light 2 hours before you go to bed. You know, sort of, because look, it's not rocket science. You know, not long ago we used to get up when the sun comes up and we go to bed when the sun comes down. Now, most people that I talk to, particularly a lot of the young Emiratis here, they don't know if it's day or night, because they're up, particularly a lot of the younger girls, they're on their cell phones, you know, at 3 o'clock in the morning. So, you know, it's really not good. But I think what I would like to make on this point on this slide is that, you know, it's just really been in the last 40 years or so that we've had these incredible advances. You know, first of all, cell phones, personal computers, the internet, digital devices, these social networks, the genome sequencing, and also our microbiome sequencing. So all this has happened in I mean, if you think about it, just in 40 odd years. So now we've combined all this. So we're at the stage now where we are going to be able to, whether you like it or you don't like it, you can measure people 24/7 remotely, very easily. And, you know, we're in a whole different movement. It's going to be a movement away from hospitals and doctors' offices into the home and the work site. Much more cost effective. And this is really about democratizing healthcare. We can spread this everywhere in, I think, a relatively short space of time, because this information is now going literally at light speed. So, we're in a whole different, thing. And I think what we need is a little rational common sense and a program that's easily able to be implemented, and use this type of technology to give constant feedback to the individual. So, what you can't measure, you can't really change. You change behavior, just like I mentioned, the continuous sugar monitoring. Once you see that, you are forever changed. So this is really important.
As a futurist, when I look at this, this to me is the future of healthcare.
Absolutely.
And moving away, as far as the doctors are concerned, from diagnostics and treatment to more care and prevention. And I think you alluded to that earlier. In this digital world, beyond 2020, let's look at 2030 now, with all sorts of new things happening in medical science. How do you see this thing developing?
I think there's always going to be the role for the human interaction, at least in the foreseeable future. At some time when singularity comes, when is it? 2028 or I don't know.
2029.
2029, okay. So, and we recognize that maybe, computers are a lot smarter than us and things. I think already, computers are taking over with certain surgical procedures. They're much more consistent and things. But I think that, there's so many things happening now with some of the, genomic work that's going on. I work with a friend of mine who can pretty much diagnose cancer before the cancer even takes hold in the body. And with a little simple 10 cc's of blood, you can actually see what's happening. And you can also measure all the inflammation, because the inflammation in the body, which is mostly from our diet, causes this genomic instability and the mutations that land up giving you cancer. So, and in fact, just as a side note, keto diets have been found to be very helpful as an adjunct to people with cancer, because cancers grow because of the sugar, which was shown by Otto Warburg in the 1930s. So, if you're fat, you're 10 times more likely to have cancer because you've got too much sugar in your body. So by reducing that, you're starving the cancer. So I think by marrying some of these great scientific advances in these things with some good clinical practice, and particularly if it's relatively inexpensive and safe without all these toxic drugs, which you really don't need, I think the future of healthcare looks, I think, pretty bright. In fact, I tell people, if you get to the age of 50, pretty much free of chronic disease today, you've got a very good chance to live to 100. So, you have to probably save a few pennies for your old age. And I'm not just talking about lifespan, but also your health span, which is even more important. You want to stay vibrant and healthy until you're, 90 or 100.
When I look at a lot of this, Graham, and the level of diagnostic work that is going on here, I don't want to become a hypochondriac and constantly looking at my numbers and my spikes and stuff. I've got to live life.
Yeah.
How do you do that?
Absolutely. No, look, life is to be enjoyed, right? I think the bad thing also, by the way, and is this whole idea of, death is very scary for a lot of people. And I think that this anxiety and all these things are often, part of that process. So, many of us believe that our mind, I'm getting now a little philosophical, but our mind is actually non-local. It's not just a little epiphenomenon of the chemistry in your brain, but it actually goes across space and time. A number of us, feel very strongly about that. And Larry Dorsey, a good friend of mine, is the proponent of one mind, that minds are at one level connected everywhere. And by the way, the great physicists, the great poets, the philosophers, they all basically agree with that. There's a lot of good evidence to suggest that, there's an idea of this non-local mind. And I'm an ardent believer in that as well, which takes away the fear of death. And so very important.
Talking about the fear of death, there's a company set up in California. It's called Longevity Inc.
Yeah.
You may be familiar with this.
Yeah.
And they have a mission to end death.
Right.
A lot of the things that you're saying, that you can anticipate stuff, and
Yeah.
you can 3D print a liver, and
Yeah.
you can use
Yeah.
genome sequencing
Yeah.
well in advance, and so on.
Yeah.
Is that all hocus pocus, or is that a reality about to happen in 10 years' time?
I don't think it's going to happen in 10 years' time. I mean, I think, can we get a good, healthy, longer health span and lifespan? Absolutely. Is it 110, 120 years? Yes. I don't think we're going to be able to, maybe we can. I mean, I'm not here to say many things have changed, but I think one of the important things is also the, when stress is moved out of people's life, and often the biggest stress is the fear of death. So I think that can be also a very important longevity factor, is to, and we know that, things like social connectivity and, people going to churches or mosques or synagogues, they tend to do a lot better than isolationists in a way. So, I don't think we should discount that tremendous sort of potential in that sort of non-local mind in a way.
Lifetime Health and Assessment Program. What does that mean? What does that do?
I tell you, I got this idea about 30 years ago, before computers were Wozniak and these guys hadn't done their thing yet. And I got it from a guy called David Bresler, who was at UCLA. He was the Dean of Public Health. And I remember reading an article in a journal that said, you know what, he was so frustrated about the episodic, fragmented healthcare that he lamented, and he said, why don't we have something like a lifetime health assessment and monitoring program? And man, it wasn't quite those words, but I thought to myself, and it stayed with me for 30 years, I thought to myself, man, that makes so much sense. Why not monitor people in some regular way and have a record of that? And you can see when people are starting to go off the tracks a bit, like a raised blood sugar, for instance. And then you can intervene in a much better way. So the idea of the LAMP, we call it, the Lifetime Health Assessment and Monitoring Program, was born. And we actually created, over the last 8 years or so, the first software for anti-aging medicine that uses an integral approach and is able, every test a person does, wherever you do it, because a lot of people move every 7 years, they're going somewhere else and things. So you can collate all this data, and particularly now with some of the wearable devices like a Fitbit or whatever you're wearing, an Apple Watch or whatever, you can input all this tremendous great data, and obviously this is happening now globally. So I think, again, one of the future things, we're going to get a lot of good information from this big data that's happening with wearable devices and the software.
This is where technology will
Yeah.
almost certainly help us
And
a
also
lot.
the artificial intelligence of it as well would be very good. Yeah. So this is the difference between the old and the new model. So this is traditional medicine, this is more the proactive medicine model. Yeah. So the big idea for us was curing diabetes, hopefully worldwide. And the idea is, imagine humankind reversing the insulin resistance and all this cardiometabolic disease. You design a simple personalized roadmap for each person, how to do it. You execute the simple program at home, primarily in the workplace, and then you evaluate it with the LAMP software and the Diabesity app. So this is our big sort of plan.
How do we capture all of this? What is the big idea, the big why behind this?
Right. So we know that there's a huge problem, as we've talked about. Half the world is fat, diabetic, and sick. So the big idea is, what if we can eliminate most of this as an idea that we can basically put a simple program together that can be delivered at home or the work site, easily implemented, supported with health coaches that are well trained and certified in this type of care, and measure the outcomes and show that lifespans and health spans are increasing with our intervention of primarily a keto intermittent fasting diet, as well as the other integral components, sleep, exercise, etc., etc. Simple lifestyle changes, which the whole idea of also genetics, genetics is probably, in my book, 15 to 20%. You might have pushback from some people, but epigenetics, the lifestyle factors are critically important, and that's what we're talking about here.
Eternity Online, it seems a completely integrated model of a lot of elements. Dr. Simpson, what exactly is it and how does it all come together?
Sure. I mean, the typical thing is when you go to a doctor's office, and you could do this in a doctor's office, but it's expensive and a lot of time wasted, etc. So the thought is that we can move, the client is really the center of our focus. And we can have the client with simple information, whether it's blogs or videos, etc. They can use a simple measuring devices, mobile devices. All their data goes onto the software, which is watched by a coach. If we set certain limits, so if your sugar goes up, certain body fat goes up too high, etc., you know, an alarm goes off with the coach, and the coach gets more involved with the client. So we're also very keen on having, I think community can be very helpful in encouraging people and sharing stories and successes as well as failures. So having a community is very important. We also train the coaches. We've got an academy that trains the coaches and doctors who are interested in this kind of medicine. And basically, that's pretty much it.
Amazing. What is the Diabesity Pod?
You know, all it is it's a freestanding structure that could go anywhere. It could go into shopping centers, it can go into corporate offices, it can go into schools, it can go pretty much in bus stations or, you know, airports. You know, you can put these little pods anywhere. Ideally, you'd like a pod with a person, so it's not completely automatic. But a person could go in and have some simple non-invasive tests, because as we mentioned, the first step, the goal one, is to quantify wellness. So Tarek, if you came and sat down there for just 20 minutes, we would do a little history, a little physical on some key things, and some non-invasive tests. And we'd have a pretty good idea of where you are on that wellness disease thing, risk. And then we'd say to you, look, we think these are issues, and this is how we can fix it. And we'd also take some blood. Some of it you can get right away. Some of it, if it was more concerned, we'd send it off to a lab. But essentially, this would be your go-to place if you wanted to, and we would obviously hook you up with the app. And this would be a go-to place for you to come back in 3 months or 2 months or 4 months and have some of these repeat to see how well you've done. So it would be very inexpensive and very convenient for you to go in and have this. And you'll also have a health coach who'd be able to answer any questions or advise you. You also obviously also get all the dietary things that you need. You get the support, you get the blogs, you get the latest news, the latest anti-aging medicine stuff. So that's basically the idea of the pod.
Is this operational here in Dubai?
There's another gentleman who's trying to get this done at the accelerator. He's having a few challenges, and we're in the process of setting up something similar to what the gentleman in DFC doing. We've mentioned this about the costs. This was the resistance to change we sort of touched on, but government's part of the problem. You have to be careful what you say here. This is the US version of it.
Do you want to do a minute on this and kill them?
Yeah, I mean, because you asked that, and it was a sensible question you asked me about, how come things aren't moving, or how come there's, a slow change that's happening. I mean, I think these are the major reasons that.
There seems to be a lot of resistance to change as far as the healthcare sector is concerned. The lobbyists are very strong. The FDA is there to process the various applications for drugs and so on. However, as far as we're concerned, we see very little change. What are the factors which are slowing it down, and what do we need to be looking at to ensure that we overcome them and actually get into the 21st century with it?
No, that's a very good point. I mean, just let me tell you personally what I think is going to happen, and why I'm excited about keto more than anything, is that I think this new model, moving away from the old Ansel Keys model, is going to be like the tipping point to move us from reactive disease medicine to proactive medicine. So I think the more, and that's why I'm sort of, I suppose, evangelical about moving this sort of keto to as many people as we can, because I do think this is going to get us off center in a way. But the existing problems are obviously big pharma, huge, big food. You know, as I mentioned, there are probably just 10 companies that are controlling most of the industry of food. Doctors, an entrenched medical, the entrenched system of medicine, although I've had recent conversations with many of the leading people in hospital chains and things like that, and they know it's coming. And, you know, while they make a lot of money putting people in beds, and hospitals are never going to go away. And I think the guys that are at the heads of these things, they know that, but they also realize that people are looking for less invasive, less costly, and a better outcome for people. So, but uninformed dietitians, I mean, this is a huge problem. They've all followed the old party line, which is wrong. So that's a major thing. Also, clients are a little confused. You know, there's thousands of diet books. They read this one, and you know, it's very confusing for a lot of people. And then, you know, you need some support to help people transition. And I think that's where a good health coach and good information can be very helpful. And as you know, in the United States, you know, government subsidizes, you know, all the bad stuff, corn, wheat, soybeans, that all kill you. And actually you land up, they make a lot of, you know, some of the snack foods we were talking about. It all gets subsidized, and it lands up in the feedlots of a lot of the cattle. So I don't think the government's doing us a big favor with some of this. And, you know, some of their policies are a little outdated as well. So, you know, I think it's a multifactorial sort of cause. But, you know, and you've seen this happen, I'm sure, Tariq, that, you know, when you get to that little tipping point, things can move quite quickly, and particularly when you consider how connected people are now globally. So I'm optimistic that, you know, things can shift, and when they do shift, they're going to happen quite rapidly.
You looked at the big picture. We've gone down to the calibration and the details of every single thing that Eternity Medicine and you, as Dr. Graham Simpson, the specialist behind it, is doing. But within all of that, there is an ultimate vision of where you want to go, what you want to achieve, what you put on your tombstone. What is that going to be?
You know, that hopefully we've been able to make people in many parts of the world that much healthier and happier. So healthy and happy are kind of important to us, and to democratize it so it can go to anyone. It's not going to, you're not going to be inhibited from going just because of the cost. So we can make it a level playing field for everyone. And then I think by using a simple 3-step approach, it's easy for people to do, and it can be easily implemented. And I think, you know, 3 of the biggest things for me, and I got this when we started Eternity in 2002, I had a gentleman come and visit, a marketing kind of person from Hawaii, and we spent the whole day coming up with 3. It was costly and a lot of time, but we came up with 3 words which I still use today. And that's, first of all, this new proactive model has to be credible. It has to be science, good science driven. Number 2, it has to be meaningful for people. If it's not meaningful, if it's not changing your life in some way, you know, making you more healthy and happy at least, then we haven't done much for people. And the third one is we really want to empower people and be able to help them sort of, you know, get good, credible information backed up, support from health coaches who know this well, and basically help them in the transition to a more, from a reactive disease model to a more proactive health model. So that's basically it.
You've also been a consummate writer. You've obviously got so many books. Can you share some of your thoughts and which one's your favorite?
This is by far my favorite, but I'm not sure everyone's going to read it because that's all about non-local mind. So, but it's a fascinating book, and my good friend Larry Dosey wrote the foreword to it, and it's been his whole passion all his life to do that. I mean, the rest, this is more about paleo before I became a keto convert, but paleo is still near and dear to my heart. And this is a current book that's basically how to reverse cardiometabolic disease with a keto diet and intermittent fasting. That was one of my first books I wrote with on inflammation. This was a book I wrote with Steve Sinatra, who's a good cardiologist in America. That was just a short little sort of, just to explain to people what cardiometabolic disease was about. And this one is really good for the whole thing about diabetes. It's written in a way, it's just 100 key things that you need to know about how to reverse diabetes. So that's pretty much it.